Welcome to Casting Light, everyone. I'm Jayla Mamadova, and we have with us here today Hanna Otani. Hanna is the Senior Project Coordinator at the Nippon Foundation, the largest Japanese private foundation. She's responsible for funding, managing, and developing education projects in Myanmar and Cambodia. She has experience of managing over 30 projects in cooperation with NGOs, government agencies, international organizations, and research institutions. So Hanna, as I just mentioned offline, we haven't conversed since 2016, and that's just ridiculous. So I hope this podcast kicks off a more kind of in tune conversation, hopefully weekly updates. But I'm super psyched to be discussing your work and all of your accomplishments in nonprofit and in education policy. So let's get into it, and thank you so much for being one of my first guests.
Thank you, Jalen, for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this project.
Thank you so much. So Hanna, let's get started and dive straight into your background. What inspired you to go into nonprofit work, and specifically, what inspired you to focus on education policy?
I guess I was already very interested in children, playing with children, and I was kind of interested in becoming a teacher when I first entered university. But then I went to work camp in Vietnam, and I helped out in an orphanage, and it was just the reality in Vietnam and in the orphanage was just so different from the reality that I had experienced in Japan. And I came to realize that about all the privileges that I had, being part of a family that had a stable income, being able to go to school, being able to go to university, all of those things were given for me, but I realized that it wasn't. And I thought that as part of my future career, I would like to be able to change this reality for children who are not able to go to schools.
Yeah. And we're going to dive into your work in education policy more specifically, but for our audience that's trying to venture into this industry and as they're thinking about starting a career in nonprofit and specifically in education policy, you know, I am from a relatively developing area of the world. I don't really like to use the word developing, but it doesn't have the institutions and resources like a country like Japan. So for, you know, the audience that's looking to start a career in nonprofit in areas of the world that don't have the institutions and resources in countries like Japan do, and have organizations, many organizations that are doing nonprofit work, but not necessarily seeing those socioeconomic results that the initiatives that they set in the onset target to do so, either because the money is being channeled in proper ways or just because of inadequate focus. How should they be thinking about the challenges of nonprofit overseas, and how should they be thinking about choosing appropriate international and local organizations to be part of as they begin their careers in this field?
I feel like when you first start your career, I guess it's very hard to see the broader picture of what kind of actors are there, what kind of impact are each of the actors actually having. So I feel like for your first 1 or 2 careers, I feel like I guess it will be kind of like, it would be kind of, there may be risks, but I think for your first career, maybe just jump into whatever NGO or international organization that you are interested in. And once you get into one organization, it will definitely help you get a wider view perspective of the actors, the kind of policies they're trying to implement, the impact that they're trying to have. So I'd say just jump into one organization first and then start your career from there, because I think that first step is risky, but also definitely worth a shot. Yes.
No, that's good to know. Just because there's so many organizations out there, and I know there was at one point I really wanted to, delve further into this, but I was intimidated by the long list of local organizations and the work that's being done, and that was intimidating to me. So it's reassuring for you to say it's good to just jump in. But
Yes.
I guess in light of that, we touched a little bit on the COVID situation
Yeah.
in Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I would just like for you to discuss maybe if you've seen any disruptions in your work, specifically
Yes.
in your projects.
So my current projects are in Myanmar and Cambodia. And in Myanmar, we are building schools to promote community development in more ethnic minority areas of Myanmar. And I also have a project that is training persons with disabilities with IT training skills to promote job opportunities for them. That's in Myanmar. And in Cambodia, I am doing more teacher training things, teacher training for English and teacher training for health subjects. And for both countries, we have seen the impact of COVID-19. And for example, for school construction, some of the school construction has had to be put off because the building companies cannot enter the construction areas, or schools have decided to open up later than usual, so teachers can't go to the schools, or sometimes the schools were used as a quarantine place for patients. So we have had to kind of make our project schedule longer, or our schedule has become delayed a little. But our partner organizations have been very good in trying to do whatever they can despite this situation.
Anna, so how does that look like? I mean, is there an ability to do virtual trainings for teachers, or has there been any effort or possibility of continuing some of the trainings and initiatives online, even if it is at a slower pace?
Yeah, especially for the teacher training in Cambodia, we have been doing a lot of online training. So initially we were planning to have face-to-face trainings with students in the teacher training colleges and also current teachers. But we have started using Zoom like we are right now. And so with Cambodian teachers and Cambodian students, for example, we're having reading workshops with the participants, and we have like a weekly checkup to see how much reading they are doing, what kind of reading they are doing, what they're getting out of it. And we can definitely see progress in their reading skills. And because they have a lot of time right now, I think it is a very good time to be investing in their capacity building skills.
Have you also been doing that in Myanmar, or is the digital infrastructure, I guess, different in Cambodia and Myanmar, or are there different complexities there?
So for Myanmar, we don't really have a teacher training program going on. So we don't necessarily have this kind of training for teachers. But for example, for the training for the IT training for persons with disabilities, the center has started Zoom sessions with the trainees. So we are trying to adapt, but it is true that because Myanmar has because the area of Myanmar is much bigger than Cambodia, the infrastructure is also, I'd say, maybe a little lagging behind in terms of IT. Like just messaging on Messenger is okay, but I'd say like Zoom might be a little unstable.
Now, you said that the construction of schools and some of those projects have been halted because of COVID-19 and construction companies not able to continue their work there. Do you have a timeline or sense as to when that may resume?
It has started to resume. So yes, in May, some of the construction sites were kind of halted, but from the end of June, they have started reopening. So maybe we may have like 3 months of delay in terms of project schedule, but I think we will be able to construct the schools without any problems.
And then talk about Nippon Foundation and how it has been supporting Myanmar, Cambodia, maybe other areas as well, both in terms of financial assistance, training, as you've mentioned, and what is the trajectory of that aid and how the organization has evolved in terms of its operations in those areas.
So the Nippon Foundation is, first of all, very unique in the way we get funding. Our funding comes actually from boat races in Japan. So it's kind of like gambling. So, but it's managed by the ministry in Japan, so it's not illegal or anything. But so about 2.7% of the revenue from boat racing comes to our foundation every year. And with this money, and also with support from other organizations, for example, from the Ministry of the Government of Japan or private companies or individuals. From this funding, we implement projects inside Japan and also outside of Japan. And our project fields are very, very diverse because our main funding comes from boat racing. Our main projects are, the majority of our projects is in maritime. For example, like the security of the ocean, or teaching about sea ocean life to students in Japan, because right now more and more children are becoming less familiar with the ocean in Japan. So we're trying to promote understanding of the ocean in Japan. So these kinds of maritime projects consist about half of our projects, but we also have a lot of social welfare, education, support for persons with disabilities, scholarships, art. Very, very diverse projects are implemented by the Nippon Foundation.
And what percent?
And then, sorry, you got caught off a little.
What percent of the focus is on education? You said most of it is on maritime projects, but just out of curiosity, how much of the funds are being allocated to education? Or what does that split look like?
So we don't necessarily have any explicit figures of education. And I guess education is kind of difficult to pinpoint because education income is kind of included in so many sectors. For example, the maritime projects that teach about education would still be considered education. Scholarships may also be considered education. And then, for example, support for mothers who are working or some kind of advocacy may be considered education also. So I'm not really sure. Maybe just 5 to 10%. Sorry, I'm not sure.
No, and I was just asking that when you were talking about the grand scheme of projects and how it's divvied up. And when I was reading or looking up the Nippon Foundation, and apologies if I'm not pronouncing it in the right form, but
You are?
relatively seems to be much more successful than a lot of other nonprofit organizations that are out there. How would you explain that success? And a lot of what you're at least telling me right now seems to be a huge participation from the standpoint of the government. So do you think government mandated support is crucial? And when we look across the world, what would you say are similar structures that have also been successful? Or would you say there are other factors that are playing in?
Yes, so definitely government mandated support is very helpful for us. This stable income that we have every year from the boat race is definitely a very huge advantage for us. Another strength that we have is that we have been implementing projects outside of Japan for about 40, 50 years now. And because of the history that we have a very strong network with government officials outside of Japan in various countries all over the world. So we have that kind of network with people in, I'd say maybe like the more higher end of stakeholders in the development agencies, but we also have very grassroots level networks based on the projects that we have implemented for decades. So I think this very this diverse network that we have, from grassroots level to national or international level, definitely it provides leverage for us to be able to figure out what are the actual needs that we need to try to improve, or who we need to work with in order to implement the projects. And in terms of if there are other organizations that have the similar kind of strength as we do, I guess like in the US, that would be Gates Foundation or Rockefeller Foundation, private foundations that have stable income, who are able to use their private networks, not just the government networks, because I think for government institutions, they have certain limits as to what they can do and what they should be doing, because they are using tax revenue from the citizens.
So Hanna, when we're thinking about use of those grassroots organizations and private networks and trying to exemplify it, I guess, in the context of Myanmar, if you could maybe opine on how that has helped build the initiatives and the project planning for Myanmar specifically. What was, Nippon's foundation base in Myanmar when we think about those grassroots organizations and relationships that have been built ex-Japan, outside of Japan?
Yes, so in terms of Myanmar, our school construction projects first started because the Japanese government first asked the Myanmar government that they would like to maybe build schools to help the citizens of Myanmar. And then the Myanmar government said, then we should start in Shan State, which is a state that is on the border, is on the Myanmar-Thailand border. It's the biggest state with the most ethnic minority groups in Myanmar. And so with that, with the advice from the Myanmar government, that is how the Nippon Foundation started school construction projects in Myanmar. After that, we looked for a grassroots, for a local NGO that would help us implement this project. And luckily, we were able to find a partner that would be willing to implement this very wide-scale project. And if it weren't for them, I'd say we wouldn't. So this project has been going on since 2002. And if we didn't have this partnership with the local NGO, we would not have been able to continue this project. They are very good at trying to really figure out which schools are really willing to cooperate with the NGO and the teachers to make sure the school construction project is not just about building a box on some random village. They make sure that the school construction project is used as part of a community development fund that will be kept on used, that the community and the teachers will continue to use even after the school construction is over. So for example, we have seen cases where the villagers have used the community development fund as seed money for microfinance activities. And this community development fund has continued to grow, has continued to increase. And with this fund, they have even constructed another school building on their own, or they have hired teachers on their own, and they have built teacher dorms for their teachers who come from distant areas. So yes, in conclusion, without our local NGOs, we would not be able to figure out the actual needs of the villages that we are supporting, and we wouldn't be able to ensure the sustainability of our projects. So they are definitely um, a very necessary partner for our projects.
And how would you compare Cambodia and Myanmar? And also, when you think about the political landscape, China often comes up as a challenging factor per se. Has it been a challenging, I guess, stakeholder or entity that has presented any complications in project implementation? And in that regard, how would you compare project implementation in Cambodia and Myanmar?
Yes, so Cambodia and Myanmar are very, very similar in terms of state of development, and also that they have a background in Buddhism, and they also share bits and pieces of culture also. And they definitely have the strong influence of China that has been that has been becoming stronger and stronger year by year. And I'd say they are trying to kind of still still maintain their independence despite China's efforts to try to provide more influence in their fields. I'd say in the education sector, China isn't trying to come in as much as, say, more geopolitical things or maybe infrastructure related projects. So as from my point of view, I haven't had any I haven't met any Chinese organizations or Chinese stakeholders when I am doing my networking or when I am looking for potential partners for implementing our education projects in both Myanmar and Cambodia.
That's so interesting. I guess I would have, I mean, does that come as shocking to you? Because I would have anticipated for it to be the reverse, right? I mean, when we think about soft power, education seems to be the most effective and initiative that probably has the most longevity in terms of impact. Even when we think about geopolitical risk, right? I mean, if you go for education and you build schools and you help build those institutions, because I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Hanna, but education policy is also a lot has to do with institution building, right? And you
Yes, very
crave it.
much.
So doesn't that in a way dampen influence or weaken influence when we think about it? And I guess from there, having drawn certain parallels for the Nippon Foundation, of the Gates Foundation, and some of these larger foundations overseas, do you think this, and one of the questions I sent over to you, this venture philanthropy model, right? The one that has a little bit in its view of this government role, as well as, you know, being more strategic in areas of investment and how they go about, how I guess would you assess China's lack of intervention on education policy, and how would you assess the Nippon kind of venture philanthropy model in terms of being a more effective one than what we usually see, which is basically grant making and just, you know, raising funds?
So I guess going to your first question about why China isn't intervening as much in the education sector, I'd say, I guess it's first of all, it's because both Myanmar and Cambodia are very proud of their education system, and they want to make sure that their citizens are learning what they want, what the government wants, to make sure they will be worth the investment that they are making currently. And so I guess for education projects, it may take more time than other infrastructure related projects. or maybe health projects, because it's difficult to kind of figure out what the actual impact will be, and it also will take a lot of time before we reach that impact. So we need to see it as a more long-term project. And I guess depending on China's priorities, do they want to have more, do they want to make sure that the investment that they have made is is returning as soon as possible, or do they want to spend more time? And it also may take more effort in trying to persuade the local governments, or like Myanmar and Cambodia, to see whatever they are trying to promote is beneficial for their citizens. So I guess maybe that may be a challenge for the Chinese governments. And as for the philanthropy venture model, unfortunately, the Nippon Foundation has started to implement the philanthropy venture model, but this is only in domestic projects, and we haven't started in international projects yet. We are still at the trial stage of trying to figure out how we can implement this more efficiently. But we have seen successful projects that have been supported for maybe about 3 years, a longer time span than normal grant projects. They have been provided with guidance on how to manage their resources, how to manage their staff. More business-related input has been put into these organizations. So I'd say it has been successful in trying to make sure that these NGOs are more sustainable even after the grant has been terminated. And from my point of view, I do hope that we can implement these kind of models into the international projects as well.
And how do you, when we speak about success and strictly focusing, let's say, on education policy, how do you measure outcomes? And specifically, what has been your experience with, better strategies of outcome measurement versus, other models?
Yes, so for education, I guess it's difficult because the impact may be seen in very different perspectives of the community and also for the country. But at least for the projects that we are implementing, for example, for the school construction projects, for example, one of our indicators is if the number of students that go to that school has increased, or if the community development fund has increased in each schools. And also another unique point of the Myanmar education system is that the elementary school, so a unique part of the Myanmar education system is that the schools build up on one another. So if there's an elementary school, it's from KG to 4 years. But then if the number of students increase and they have adequate school facility and the government approves, they are upgraded to a middle school, and then grade 5 and 6 students are able to come. And then if even more students come to that school, then it will be upgraded to a high school. And we have seen that the schools that we have constructed have been upgraded from elementary school to middle school to high school. And because of that, the students in those villages are able to get a longer education than if we hadn't constructed those schools. So the upgrading of schools is also another indicator in our projects.
So you ultimately also have to adapt it to your area of operation, correct?
Yes. Yes, definitely.
And Hanna, I also want to ask you, and this is what, going back to our offline chat about, areas of focus, and you brought about sustainability. So I want to hear your insights as to what measures are taken and what the efforts are in terms of ensuring that your operations in Cambodia and Myanmar are sustainable.
Yes, so for example, in Myanmar, as I mentioned before, we have the Community Development Fund to make sure that the community is able to manage the school and improve the school even after our funding has ended. I personally, and also the Nippon Foundation, really tries to make sure that our projects are sustainable. We really do not like projects where we just put we just build something, and when we come back 5 years later, nothing is left of it. We really hope that the funding that we provide will be an investment for the future. So for the Myanmar side, this Community Development Fund is a very strong component of sustainability. And for example, in Cambodia, we have just started a health project, a school health project. And for example, we have partnered with a kind of social venture company, social startup that sells herbs that are grown by local schools or local students, and they manufacture it into a herb tea, and they sell it to anyone who is interested. I myself have bought that herb tea also, but with the revenue of this herb tea, a part of it goes back to the school so that the schools can use it as can use it to fund for their school health room or any kind of materials they may need to maintain their hygiene and sanitation. So we try to make sure that the local partners, the schools or the teachers, will have some kind of funding even after our project funding has ended.
Hanna, I know we're close to wrapping up, but I want to ask you kind of your more forward-looking thoughts in terms of how you see your workflow unfold in the next few months, especially amid COVID and with all these question marks of seeing another peak or another wave, and kind of the uncertainty around that, how that's impacting, or you anticipate for that to be impacting your work and project flow, as well as more broadly shifts that we should be thinking about education policy at large, and kind of your tidbits and advice for an audience that's trying to enter this space in this climate.
So in terms of changes in education policy due to COVID, I'd say e-learning, using online tools for learning, is definitely a huge trend that is coming into the education sector. For example, some of the teaching materials that we made in Cambodia have been uploaded and are being distributed by the Ministry of Education in Cambodia online, because they want to make sure that the students are able to use these materials. And we're also coming up with more online teaching materials in the health subject also. So I'd say in the education sector, definitely this wave of online training is increasing, is going to increase more and more. And as for myself, in terms of how I will try to manage my projects in the next 6 months or a year, I think our projects are in progress, although maybe a little slowly than usual. So I'd say I'm not really worried about if our projects will be successfully implemented or not. I'm pretty sure it will be okay, I guess. But for myself, I think I would like to use this time to kind of reorganize and kind of try to see, maybe try to figure out the success of our projects and the challenges of our projects. And we're hoping to do this, or we're hoping to organize an event with all of our school construction partners, and to kind of gather the challenges that we've faced as well as the progress that we have made. And we're planning to present it to the Myanmar government. And so I'd like to use this time to kind of really I'd like to use this time to really figure out what progress we have made so far and what future projects we can do in the coming years.
And out of curiosity, and for the construction partners that you have, are those local companies, or do you partner with kind of umbrella international companies? Just also when thinking about accountability, how do you go about selecting those?
So the Nippon Foundation doesn't directly work with the construction companies. We're working with the local NGOs and the local NGOs decide on which company should be doing the school construction. And our local NGOs, most of them are Myanmar staff, but sometimes the representatives are Japanese. And I guess that facilitates the communication between the Nippon Foundation and the local NGO, and also, I guess, have a common understanding of how the project progress should take place, as well as the long-term vision of the projects.
But the funding is entirely from the Nippon Foundation, or is it split with local entities in some form?
It really depends. It depends on the partner organizations. Some of the projects are 100% funded by the Nippon Foundation. Sometimes they are funded by other international organizations. Sometimes by local individuals. Donation is a very big culture in Myanmar. So that donation is sometimes forwarded to local NGOs as well. We have diverse stakeholders there.
And then lastly, I just want to ask you about, having noted that there is ample domestic work in the Nippon Foundation, and I guess from maybe your lessons learned so far out of Myanmar and Cambodia, what are your hopes in terms of, seeing nonprofit work and education policy specifically being implemented overseas? What would you say are the top criteria when we think about measuring success at an organization level, and really coming down to our audience? And when we talk about kind of choosing organizations or thinking about nonprofit organizations, what are your hopes for success overseas that could be taken from lessons that you've learned, are either from domestic work that the Nippon Foundation has done, or from your own experience in Cambodia and Myanmar?
Yes, so for the Nippon Foundation, one of our factors, or one of our indicators for success of projects, is if the project has been accommodated by the government as part of a national policy. So a couple of Nippon Foundation's projects has been started at grassroots level, but we have scaled it up and also advocated to the government, so that the Japanese government or other governments, Cambodia and Myanmar, Cambodia especially, has adopted our projects as part of their national curriculum or national policy, and that is a very big factor in terms of indicator for success for the Nippon Foundation. So I guess for myself also, I hope that I am able to come up with projects that will influence the national policies of the governments that we are working with.
And lastly, I just want to end on the note of, are there any other parts of the world where the Nippon Foundation is working, or just at large that you would have this interest in working on education policy? What's next after Myanmar and Cambodia? Where else would you like to experience?
I don't know. Anywhere is I'd be interested in working anywhere. The Nippon Foundation works in many, many other countries also. We work in India, Africa, different parts of Africa, a little bit of Euro-Asia also, South America also.
So
I'm
hopefully
interested in working.
having mentioned Euro-Asia, hopefully we'll see you in the Caucasus in the much
Yes.
landscape
Yes.
of education. But I thank you so much for all of your insights today and for sharing with us the work that you do. And thank you so much for being, one of my first guests on this podcast. I'm super excited to share this interview with our audience. I will link your information below, and I will
Thank you
link,
very much.
I will link the site for the Nippon Foundation for our audience to read more about. And hopefully, as we get more questions from followers, as that base grows, perhaps we can do a live session with Hanna and have live questions be answered. But thank you so much, Hanna. I appreciate beyond you taking the time and sharing all of your insights.
Thank you, Jalen, and I'm really excited to be part of this project, and I look forward to seeing how this project develops even more.
Hopefully it develops well. Thank you so much, Hanna.